Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are looking at an absolute instant classic. We're decoding Game 1 of the Western Conference semifinals between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the San Antonio Spurs. And guys, this wasn't just your standard playoff matchup. It was a historic, absolute grinder of a game, a 104-102 thriller where the Timberwolves somehow managed to walk away with a victory right on the Spurs' home court. There is just so much to unpack here, from literally record-shattering defensive performances all the way to some pretty chaotic final-second coaching decisions. So let's figure out exactly what happened. To really understand Game 1, you have to look at the vastly different paths these two teams took to get here. It's basically the ultimate scenario of rest versus rust. Think about it. Minnesota had just spent 6 absolutely grueling games, nearly 2 full weeks, trying to solve Nikola Jokic, who is arguably the NBA's most potent offensive center. They were physically and emotionally drained, and then they had to rapidly pivot their entire game plan. And San Antonio? Well, they were resting. The Spurs had 6 full days off after cleanly ousting Portland in 5 games. So San Antonio had to find their rhythm all over again, right as Minnesota was transitioning from guarding an offensive mastermind to facing a complete defensive juggernaut. We're breaking this game down into 4 specific keys today: the anomaly, the counterpunch, trench warfare, and the final decisions. Starting right off with key number 1, the anomaly. You literally cannot talk about this game without talking about the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Victor Wembanyama, and how he completely warped the geometry of the basketball court. 12. That is the mind-blowing number of shots Wembanyama blocked in this single game. 12. He accounted for a huge share of Minnesota's 50 total missed shots. To put that into perspective for you, watching Wembanyama protect the rim was basically like watching a 7'4" windmill swatting away everything in sight. It honestly evoked the 1960s, like giving us a glimpse of what it must have been like to watch legends like Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell just turn back opponents before blocks were even officially tracked. Speaking of tracking, the NBA only started officially recording blocks in the 1973-74 season, and before this Game 1, the single-game playoff record was held jointly at 10 blocks by a trio of absolute legends: the Jazz's Mark Eaton in 1985, the Rockets' Hakeem Olajuwon in 1990, and the Lakers' Andrew Bynum in 2012. Wembanyama didn't just tie this record, he completely cleared it. I mean, there was literally no Timberwolves shot attempt that seemed beyond his reach. Which brings us to key number 2, the counterpunch. So the big question is, how do you actually win a basketball game when the opposing center is having a historically great defensive night? Well, first, it started with a really defiant mindset. Even while chuckling about those 12 blocks in the postgame, Julius Randle made it totally clear. They were not going to let Wembanyama intimidate them out of the paint. He said, "We're not going to just not attack the basket. We're not going to let him just deter us from attacking the rim." They accepted that they needed to be smarter, for sure, but the crucial point is that they absolutely refused to stop driving. That psychological resilience was step 1. Step 2 was tactical. Head coach Chris Finch and the Timberwolves didn't just keep banging their heads against a wall. They adapted in the second half. They started putting way more arc on some of their shots just to clear Wembanyama's wingspan. They started switching hands midair to throw off his shot-blocking timing. They also improved their spacing and off-ball movement to keep the Spurs' defense constantly scrambling, and they relentlessly targeted the glass. Finch even noted after the game that they quibbled with a few uncalled goaltendings, which, is probably just him planting a few tactical seeds for the officials heading into Game 2. But honestly, the biggest counterpunch of all was practically a medical surprise. Anthony Edwards, who was already known for his incredible physical resiliency, somehow fast-tracked his recovery from a bone bruise and a hyperextended left knee that he suffered just days prior in Game 4 against Denver. Coming off the bench, Edwards played 25 minutes and scored 18 points, including 2 three-pointers. Now, while those might seem like modest numbers for a guy like Ant, his return provided this essential, undeniable mojo for the team. And this was absolutely critical because Minnesota's backcourt depth was severely depleted, with both Donte DiVincenzo and Ayo Dosunmu out. But we have to be fair here. Minnesota's survival wasn't entirely of their own making. 0 for 8. That is Wembanyama's stat line from the three-point line in this game. While he was an absolute terror on defense, he inadvertently let Minnesota off the hook on the offensive end by missing every single one of those outside shots. Shooting from deep is definitely a staple of his game, but every single time he opted to shoot from the arc, rather than just dominating the paint, you could almost hear a collective sigh of relief from the Timberwolves' defense. Moving right along to key number 3, trench warfare. Both of these rosters are built from the ground up with a defense-first mentality, and this game was an absolute physical grind. The sheer toll of this physicality was massive across the board. San Antonio's Stephen Castle completely fouled out. Minnesota's Julius Randle and Jaden McDaniels were walking a terrifying tightrope with 5 fouls each. And then you had Naz Reid, Devin Vassell, and Dylan Harper all saddled with 4 fouls. It was bumping, it was bruising, and it is a crystal clear forecast of the intense, contact-heavy basketball we can absolutely expect for the rest of this series. And all of this foul trouble highlights a really brilliant strategic reality. We've talked a lot about Wembanyama's 12 blocked shots, but here's the other side of that equation. Minnesota shot 21 free throws in this game, making 12 of them. The crucial takeaway here, Wembanyama can block a record number of field goals, but he literally cannot block free throws. By fully leaning into the physicality and drawing those fouls, Minnesota found a reliable way to generate points that completely bypass the Spurs' towering rim protector. And that brings us to our last key number 4, the final decisions. So look at the board. You have a historic defensive anomaly, you have a defiant counterpunch, and you have this grueling physical warfare. And it all culminated in one massive question hanging over the final 60 seconds of this game. To timeout or not to timeout? Both head coaches, Chris Finch for Minnesota and Mitch Johnson for San Antonio, had to make these split-second judgments with the game totally on the line. And fascinatingly, both of them chose to swallow their whistles and just let their players play through the chaos. Let's actually walk through this timeline because it's wild. 34.4 seconds left on the clock. Minnesota is up by 4 and they have the ball. Finch passes on a timeout. The result? A perfectly timed stolen pass by Devin Vassell, leading to a Dylan Harper layup. Suddenly, that lead is cut to 2. Fast forward to just 8 seconds left. Julius Randle misses a 17-footer. The Spurs grab the rebound. Coach Johnson has 2 timeouts in his pocket, but he also passes. They just push the floor, Julian Champagnie launches from 3, and it bangs off the rim as time expires. Minnesota survives. But despite that agonizing Game 1 loss, the Spurs really aren't panicking at all. Julian Champagnie's reaction to missing that final shot felt pretty solid. Missed the shot, on to the next. That is such a calm, resilient mindset. Coach Johnson had absolutely no problem with the look, even though they technically only needed a 2 to tie, and Champagnie was perfectly fine with taking the attempt. They know exactly who they are as a team, and they are more than ready to turn the page. Which brings us to the ultimate question leaving this explainer. Minnesota just proved they have the depth, the defiance, and the tactical flexibility to survive a literal piece of NBA history. But you know, a Greg Popovich-built organization led by Mitch Johnson is not just going to sit still and take it. So how will Wembanyama and the Spurs adapt their shot selection and their physical game plan for Game 2? I literally cannot wait to find out. Thanks so much for unpacking this with me, and I'll catch you guys for the next explainer.